throughout the show tonight, we've been talking about the Queen's speech and what's been coming out of that. And part of that is, of course, about the safety of homes, which is a conversation we have widely held here on this programme, not least following the Grenfell Tower fire in 2017, in which 72 people sadly lost their lives. Now, in her speech today, the Queen set out the government's planned new laws for the coming year in the state opening of Parliament. Included in the 30 bills was a new building safety bill to make sure the lessons of the Grenfell Tower tragedy are learnt. It aims to remove unsafe cladding and give residents a stronger voice.
My ministers will establish in law a new building safety regulator to ensure that the tragedies of the past are never repeated.
Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, told the Commons that the leaseholders still faced massive bills for the removal of cladding, while many residents were still living in fear.
Look no further than the fire in a block of flats in East London last week. Mr. Speaker, there is no excuse for the Prime Minister's inaction on cladding. That should have been in this address.
Now, Sebastian O'Kelly is the chief executive of the Leaseholders Charity and someone who we've spoken to time and time again following the cladding crisis. And he joins me now. Sebastian O'Kelly, welcome back to Drivetime.
Hi there.
Lovely to have you here, and thank you so much for taking the time. How does that speech from the Queen resonate with you?
Well, I mean, this build safety bill is, it addresses some technical points which are good, but we've got leaseholders' huge bill. And this is still unaddressed. We don't know what is going to happen with the forced loans for sites less than 18 metres. Leaseholders are still picking up huge bills for historic build defects built by developers. And they're the only people who are really paying for this.
There was a conversation from the government a while back about putting aside money that was available for leaseholders, wasn't there? Something that they could apply to help with the funds and the fees?
Well, they put aside £5 billion, but the bill is widely estimated at £15 billion. So there's a £10 billion hole here, and leaseholders simply cannot afford to pay this. They're going to lose their homes. So what is the government doing to help this generation of home buyers who, in good faith, bought flats off household name builders in London and other cities, who are now facing these huge bills for cladding defects that they're simply not responsible for?
I'm sure the government's argument would be that they can't cover the cost either. It looks like no one wants to cover that cost or has the budget. What's the ideal solution here, Sebastian?
Well, what we need to do is to find out what went wrong with building or the developers who are at fault here. What degree each is at fault be established, but the one people absolutely not at fault were the leaseholders, the consumers who bought this gift for huge bills. So the bill, we've been assured by ministers all along that this building safety bill will put right all the failings. Fire Safety Bill or Fire Safety Act, which went through just at the end of the last session, which made leaseholders responsible for historic build defects. And I'm afraid
I think we've just
trust, given that ministers have said time and again that leaseholders shouldn't pay for these defects, and now they are.
Sebastian, I'm just going to hold you right there because your line is a little patchy. Forgive us, listeners. It keeps dropping out there. Technology, as per usual, never working when you want it to. We're just going to get Sebastian back on a better line in just a moment. Thank you for bearing with us. As we're having this conversation about buildings and building safety, are you a leaseholder? And are you worried? If so, I have to say, as a Londoner who lives in West London and lives very close to Grenfell, I'm at a stage where I am trying to save my pennies to buy a little flat of my own. And I may be a long way away from that, but I am looking at buildings, and so many flats are on those apps and those websites. And I genuinely have a real fear about, well, what was the building made out of? Is it safe? Is the cladding safe? And will I be burdened with a massive cost? Sebastian, I think we've got you back there. And I just wanted to ask you, first-time buyers who are trying to get on the property ladder in London, what does this mean for them? And are there extra checks you would advise they go through, especially when they're looking to buy a flat?
I think my advice to first-time buyers is to be very cautious indeed of buying flats, particularly in anything very complicated like a shared ownership scheme. The other part of the Queen's speech addressed ground rents, and they're going to ban new ground rents in new properties. Now, ground rents are simply an investment vehicle that you, the homeowner, pay for to somebody else. That somebody else may be based in the British Virgin Islands, but owns the freehold to your block. My advice to any consumers now is not to buy flats with ground rents. Simply avoid them. Don't pay for them. Don't buy them. And I'd be very cautious about flats in any case. You've got to make very sure that they don't have historic build defects that you might then have to pay for. And you want to question very closely the new flats that are on offer and what's the situation with warranties and any potential defects in those buildings. Generally speaking, I think I would advise first-time buyers to avoid new flats altogether, if possible.
Sebastian, just last week in Poplar, a fire broke out with exactly the same cladding as Grenfell. That must be devastating to see. How did you feel seeing this? Does it feel like history is just going to keep repeating itself?
Yes, it does. It was awful, and I was very glad to join a demonstration on Saturday of the residents of New Providence Wharf as well. I mean, this is a site where the developer is prepared to pay £500,000 to remediate the site when he finally gets around to it 4 years after Grenfell. But the bill is £12 million. So there's a bit of a shortfall there, and the residents are going to have to pay for that unless there is assistance from the government. So Peter Bottomley said in the Chamber today, after the Queen's speech, that there desperately needs to be a sort of a meeting of all affected parties, including the stakeholders, the leaseholders and the leaseholders representatives, with the developers. And that can't come soon enough, frankly. This top-down business of developers only talking to government and officials has resulted in a complete disaster. And we must get some consumer groups on top of this sector, which is, I'm afraid, at fault.
Does the buck stop with the developers, with the people who signed off on building that actual structure? Are they the people that need to be held responsible?
Well, it's because there's not been a court case. It's difficult to say. It's a mixture of the regulators and the developer, but it isn't the consumers who are being made to pay for it. That's the point.
Do we need a court case?
I think we do. It would have clarified things greatly. But unfortunately, both the government and the house builders, who work very closely together, neither of them wants a court case to establish responsibility, I'm afraid. It's far better to pick on the weakest link, the leaseholders, and make them pay. And that seems to be the position that we're in at the moment.
We don't have a court case, but we had the Queen who wanted to include the new bill and speaking about it. Is that enough? Does that hold enough clout? What does that mean for those people who are in, like you mentioned there, awful predicaments, having to foot the bills?
Well, it's good that obviously this will be discussed and debated in Parliament. We've had excellent debates in the House of Lords over the fire safety bill. The Commons has got a host of MPs who really do understand these issues and are making brilliant contributions, most of them on the opposition benches, I'm afraid to say, but not all of them. And Stephen McPartland was one of the Conservative MP, was very vocal in resisting the fire safety bill, and about 39 the Conservative MPs didn't support it. So there's quite a big rebellion on that. So it is encouraging that there are independently minded MPs who are aware of these issues and are prepared to vote against the government on this.
I was about to ask you there, Sebastian, what the reaction has been like from politicians. But judging on what you just said there, to me, it sounds like it's something to use in debate from the opposition and not something that MPs are unanimously, collaboratively working together on, which seems a bit absurd.
Well, if there was a consensus or any disposition on the part of the ministers to meet with MPs, consumer groups, and the leaseholders who are being held responsible for paying for this remediation work, then there would be less conflict. But while ministers are not meeting MPs and consumer groups, it's not surprising that the debates are pretty controversial.
Sebastian, what would you like to see happen next?
Well, it would be very good to see the government has got to intervene here, otherwise tens of thousands of people are going to lose their homes because they'll simply be wiped out by these build safety bills. So an intervention is going to happen. They've been warned for some years now that they're going to have to intervene. I think that we've got to open this out now, and the government has got to speak to consumer groups and to establish some sort of consensus on the responsibility of why combustible cladding was put up on apartment blocks around the country, and then establish who is going to pay to remediate that.
Sebastian O'Kelly, thank you for such an informative conversation.
Thanks.
Take care of yourself.